Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Ringer with Polar Bears International, and welcome to our final event in our 2020 Conservation Happy Hour series. It has been a very intense and challenging year, and we're really excited to be closing out this series with a topic that is innovative and absolutely inspiring. Before we get started and dive in, and we do have quite a panel on board for you today, and I think the panel here and the collaboration here really speaks to the teamwork and collaborative nature that is the heart of so much of what PBI does, and particularly this project. Now, it's really important to us that as we are going through the presentation today, that you're able to engage with these panelists and to ask questions. So before I introduce them and hand them the floor, I want to make sure that everybody has the tools they need to do that, because I do see some new names on our list. So you will see in your Zoom window, in the bottom toolbar, there should be a couple of icons. There's a chat icon that's already very active. So please chat at us, say hello, let us know where you're watching from. If you have a formal question for a panelist, please submit that via the Q&A feature. So it's a little overlapping dialog box, and you can submit that. That will come to me, and then I will do my best to pepper those questions throughout this presentation, and anything that we don't get to during the presentation, I will be sure to pose to our panelists at the end. And if you're having any trouble with these features, don't hesitate to reach out to us in the chat, and we will do our best to help you. So with that, I am going to introduce our panelists at hand today and hand it over to them. So you will be hearing about a new and innovative collaboration that is moving out of the lab and into the Arctic as of this fall. And to bring us through that story, we have our Senior Director of Conservation, Geoff York, our Director of Field Operations, BJ Kirschhoffer, BJ's father, so we're very lucky to have special guest, Jon Kirschhoffer. He's retiring at the end of this year, but an advanced research specialist at 3M. And then our program manager, Marisa Kraus. So I think we're going to start today with Geoff. So Geoff, I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to you.
Making sure I'm virtually unmuted before I start.
Yes.
Thanks, Emily. So to start with, I guess we could go back to why do we track animals? And it's really one of the sort of holy grails in wildlife ecology, wildlife biology, is the ability to see where animals go and what they do when we're not watching, which is most of the time, especially if you think of an animal like the polar bear that spends most of its life out on the sea ice in places we find very difficult to get to or nearly impossible in some cases. So understanding how animals use habitat, what's important to them at different times of year, how that changes over time, especially right now with the warming of climate and the loss of sea ice, how is that impacting polar bear movements, polar bear distribution? But movements also feed into things you wouldn't think of, like population estimates. So to know how many animals live in a certain place, we need to know something about how those animals move. Do they stay in certain areas or populations, as we like to call them? Or do they come and go? Is there a lot of immigration and outmigration, to and from that population? That's really important if you're estimating numbers there. It also helps us answer applied questions. So if you think of polar bears, the fact that they're a marine mammal, live out in the ocean ice interface, what happens if there was a ship accident or an oil and gas accident and we had an oil spill? How many polar bears might be oiled? The only way we can answer that question is from tracking data. We have to know something about the movement of bears, and we have to know something about their habitat use. So it's super important, answers all kinds of questions, also questions related to denning for bears. Where do bears den? Why? How long? Things like that. So a host of things we know about polar bears, we know from those long-term tracking studies there. So just a quick history of tagging and tracking for polar bears, going back to the Craigheads who pioneered radio tracking of brown bears in Yellowstone Park. That technology fairly quickly matriculated up to other bear species, including black bears and then polar bears in the late 60s, early 70s, including our very own Steve Amstrup, who was among the first to put radio collars on polar bears. These were the old VHF type collars. You had to physically go out, typically in a small airplane, sometimes on the ground, to track the animal, to listen for that ping and to then triangulate where the animals were. So it was super labor intensive, expensive, and more than a little bit dangerous at times to be flying around, especially in the Arctic in small aircraft at low altitudes. So we moved on to the next thing, which were satellite-based tracking devices. Initially, they were Argos, which is another way of using satellites to triangulate a position for you. And those moved on to GPS tags, which are just like the GPSs we use in other devices. They give us really accurate location data and what we call fine scale movements data. The problem with bears is from the get-go, everything was based in collars. And those collars were initially large and clunky. They've gotten smaller like most technology over the years, but due to polar bear physiology, they're only able to safely go out on adult females. Polar bear males have necks that are bigger than their heads. They're kind of cone-shaped, and so collars will fall off. Other bears that are younger are growing too rapidly, and so it's not safe to collar them because they might grow enough where the collar could pose a problem, could injure them. And so everything we know from the 70s up through now about polar bears, for the most part, has to do with the movements of adult females. We know very little about the movement of adult males. We know next to nothing about the movement of subadult bears. So we had to find new and better ways to look at things. Early on, we had these large clunky VHF ear tags, not a good solution, damaging to ears, and just way too big. Back in the early 2000s, I picked up the thread at USGS, and working with our team there, we started looking at RFID, radio frequency ID tags, to see if that was something that might be small and light enough that we could put on an existing ear tag to identify bears remotely. But we were kind of ahead of the game on technology for that. The idea was good. The technology didn't exist at that time to really be successful, so that got shelved. Fast forward to 2014 and a polar bear specialist group meeting in Colorado, where we had a group discussion on innovation and capture, handling, tagging, and tracking. That's one thing I think it's important to emphasize is biologists are always trying to figure out ways to do things better. We're not just kind of resting on the way things are. We recognize collars aren't perfect. They give us great data, but we're missing things, and collars themselves could still be improved. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to do things better, and one of those is definitely on the tracking side. That meeting led to a workshop that was held in 2016 at the International Bear Association meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, where we focused on polar bear specific tagging and tracking ideas. At that meeting, we parsed out different pieces of the puzzle. And so I raised my hand for PBI that we would try to figure out a better method to attach tags to polar bear fur. Not knowing at the time how we would do that, but saying, I'm sure there's an answer out there, we can figure this out. That led to discussions with BJ, my colleague at PBI. We made an early run at 3M. It was a clear target of ours from an industrial perspective. These folks know how to make things stick. And we didn't get very far. We didn't have the right lines of communication. BJ then took it the next step and took the idea to his dad. And that's kind of where we launched the story today. So I'll turn it over to BJ with that.
Thanks, Geoff, and great to be with you all here tonight. I do want to kind of rewind a little bit to, growing up in the Kirschhoffer household. Oddly enough, I grew up in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and attended White Bear Lake High School, where, of course, our mascot is a polar bear. So perhaps all of this is all fate. But in our household, Dad, of course, worked at 3M and was constantly bringing things home that he was working on, tape dispensers, medical devices, whatever it may be. And we had no shortage of industrial adhesives and tapes around the house for me to glue things to the wall or stick our fingers together or whatever it may be. So, you know, I mean, I think there was always this encouragement to tinker with things around the house, and there was always ample materials to do that with. You know, my dad here, of course, is about to wrap up his career at 3M. So we've got, you know, we had this incredible opportunity to tap into his expertise, which is now at something like 39 and a half years at 3M. So I think PBI was extremely lucky to be able to grab my dad's attention, although it was a little bit hard at first. Like Geoff said, we made an initial run, and of course things are busy over there. And then we sent an email up to Fish and Wildlife Service in Anchorage and said, hey, do you have any polar bear pelts laying around? We would like to do some testing on tags. And we had an entire polar bear pelt shipped to my dad's desk. Once that thing showed up, it turned some heads, and we were off and running. So anyways, with that, I would like to introduce my dad, Jon Kirschhoffer, the older Jon Kirschhoffer here, and take it away, Pops.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It's good to be here tonight. And B just stole my joke. Anyway, yeah, you did get our attention, and the hide did do that. So I'm an employee. I'm an engineer, not an engineer. I'm sorry. I am an industrial designer by training, but I'm a scientist. My title is Advanced Research Specialist. You know, I'm part of an organization, an amazing organization that really prides ourselves in scientific research and making life better for the world. You know, applying science really to improve lives. And this was really a special project that came along and really, you know, allowed us to demonstrate what's best about 3M. So as has been described, I got this call from Beej, and you know, he said, just like Geoff had described, he's going, Dad, you work for a company that makes things stick. Can you make a tag stick to a bear, right? And loving that challenge, I turned around, and we have an organization within 3M called Tech Forum, and Tech Forum is a you know, a body of technical folks throughout the company. It's established and run by the employees themselves, self-operating, self-organizing, self-governing, and the whole point is to collaborate and to exchange ideas. And so I reached out to the Tech Forum community and put together an event we called the Tag-A-Bear Challenge. You see a picture here from that first challenge, a brainstorming event, if you will. It was a 2-day thing, starting off with introductions by Geoff and BJ, and I think I'm trying to recall if Steve Amstrup was on, or was it Andy?
From USGS in Anchorage, as well as Jenny Stern working on hair in University of Washington.
Yeah. So really well represented, great background information for all the people here. I was just looking at the list actually this morning, and I think there were about 75 people invited to this first event. And so, you know, we were presented with the challenge, try and, you know, attach these radio tags, you know, which is about the size of a pack of gum, if you will, attach this to a bear, attach it to the fur, and do it in a way that's non-invasive, that works with the you know, their natural systems. They molt, and so if we attach the fur, when the radio tag, you know, when the battery dies, then it will drop off when the bear molts, and it won't be living with this dead tag for the rest of its life on its body. Where we try to use materials that are in our designs that are non-toxic and that are sustainable and those kinds of things. So we began with that brainstorm session, and it's been about a 2-year endeavor, and it's a volunteer effort. We also have a policy or a sort of an understanding within the company, a thing we call 15% time, and this is a policy that's been in place for decades, actually established first by one of our first CEOs of the company, William L. McKnight. And the idea is to allow us to, take and chase our passions, find something that we really are interested in, and take our free time up to about 15% of our regular workday. We can devote to these special projects. And so that's what this became, was a 15% time project for a lot of folks. And so we worked together, we collaborated around solving this problem, sketches, models, prototypes, designs. We evolved these ideas and then took them into the laboratory where we did a variety of tests to abuse them, to test their ability to hang into the fur. And that's where the hide came into, the pelt that BJ talked about. That's where that came into play, where not only what we were simulating some of the environmental conditions and the behaviors of the bears as best we could in the lab, but the pelt really helped in a great way to be able to attach to the real thing as opposed to simulated furs and that kind of thing. So we put these designs through these tests, and over the period of time we've reduced it down to essentially four different concepts, methodologies, what you see here on this table, and then we've been able to get them onto some actual bears this fall and test the performance. So we have in laboratory testing, and now we're doing field testing, and they're not perfect. Some work better than others. We have our best of the many in these four, and we're really excited to see how they actually perform in the wild. What you see are a variety of different things. The tag, I don't know if you can see can you see my cursor? Beach, can you see it? No, you can't. Okay. So
No.
okay. So the radio tag is the piece with the little wire on it, and that's in the middle of these different assemblies. But we're using a variety of different systems to attach the fur. Some mechanical, some are adhesive, some are kind of combinations of the above, right? And we grip the fur, we entangle the fur, we use adhesives, and in some of these, this one here is so BJ brought this to me, and he called this project Burr and Furr. And this one that you see here is most like that. We have essentially a bottle brush that when twisted into the fur, entangles it and captures it and holds this triangular platform in place on the animal. I don't know if you can go to one of the next ones, Emily.
Yep.
Right. So this is one of the adhesive approaches. So it's like a starfish with layers, two flaps that open up and an adhesive layer in between. And so we can attach that via the adhesive system. This is a 3M proprietary adhesive that's again non-toxic, and actually it's food safe as well, and it's designed to stick in extremely cold conditions, so really appropriate for this application. We're actually anxious to see how this one performs. And then if there's another one there, yep, this one uses one of our standard interlocking closure mechanisms, or systems. And like the adhesive one, you lay it in the fur, you rub the fur into it and close it up, and it locks on itself and holds the fur in place. Now, some of these, we anticipated that some will work better than others, and we can, like this one or the brush one that you saw at first, we can augment that with an epoxy like adhesive as well, to just to reinforce the bond. So these are, essentially the concepts. This is the last one. This one is a crimping like system, not unlike hair crimps, or like if you put in hair, if any of you put in hair extensions, right? This is just an oversized version of the crimp that's used to attach hair to hair extensions. So yeah. So like I say, these are the concepts. They're being deployed. We're anxious to hear about the results. This has been an incredible journey, after 2 years, and timing is perfect. as BJ mentioned, I'll be retiring pretty soon here. But I know that there will be a long-term relationship with 3M on these. And, as I walk away from this, I look at it and I go, this has really been, again, the best example of 3M innovation and collaboration. We're really excited about that collaboration and the results of this project. So, yeah.
Jon, I have a question that came in here that I'm hoping to pass to you.
Yeah.
Which harsh Arctic condition was most difficult to design for? So salt, cold, polar bear behavior.
That's really a good question. We were pretty confident all the way along that the more mechanical solutions would cross a lot of the boundaries, a lot of the different kind of conditions. I guess what we couldn't anticipate as accurately is what kind of abuses the bear would apply to these things, right? Would they roll on them? And so the positioning of these, and Geoff, you've actually helped apply them, but what we talked about was to apply it on above their shoulders, on the low part of their neck, in hopes that would be least accessible to the bear to be able to rip it off. But I know the first bears we're talking about having wandered through the willows on the tundra, and just yeah, exactly. We don't know what they do, but they can sure put the abuse on. And so that was probably the hardest thing to really model and anticipate.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of challenges to overcome with
Very much so.
project.
Yeah.
Well,
So I think, I was going to just say, as you said, BJ, when the hide arrived, I pulled it out of the box and unfolded it and laid it out on the floor in the hallway in our work area. And it was just like, word got around so fast, and there was just a crowd around there going like, what is this? So it was really pretty exciting. We treat it with great reverence. Actually, it's home with me right now. It's sitting next to me on the floor. So
I think what's interesting here is, you've seen multiple solutions there that were put together. And, of course, COVID has thrown all of us incredible curveballs, and of course, all of them quite serious. This project, I think we were pretty excited to even be able to make any movement whatsoever. We had plans and then had to come up with plan B and then plan C. And then finally a window opened, and somehow we were able to sneak Geoff into Canada and get these tags finished and sent up to him. And was able to get them into the hands of the folks that monitor and really kind of protect the town of Churchill, Polar Bear Alert Program. And so I think this is just sort of a neat example again of a lot of people coming together and then really just sort of making it happen here to get some results. Currently, we've deployed something like 5 tags, and 2 of them are still active out on the Hudson Bay right now. We're getting weekly updates to how those tags are performing. So it's a nice first step. I think we were happy just to be able to get anything out, frankly, in this year. And I did tell Dad he couldn't retire until we got one of these on a bear. So luckily Geoff was productive up there, or else you'd have to sign on for another year there, Dad.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and thankfully, per the 15% time and the policy approach at 3M and just basically very, very understanding management, my supervisor in particular he's equally excited about this. And so he was willing to clear a path for me so that I could devote as much time to this as possible, which is really incredible. Right.
And I hope I'm not stealing this from you, Geoff, but I just want to say that I think it's kind of neat that you've seen a lot of different solutions here, and maybe one of the aspects of the project that wasn't anticipated was that these 5 or so solutions ended up in the hands of Geoff in Churchill, and the resource managers up there could help decide which ones they think would work best. And I think that's an important aspect here, asking for input for the people that actually handle these animals over and over again for what they think will work is important. So I think that's kind of neat, and then we'll carry on. Later on here in this talk, we'll talk about next steps, but also kind of in different jurisdictions where and what will be important to people will differ, and potentially we'll have options for them. So anyways, I'd like to pass the floor back to Geoff to talk about the deployment itself.
Yeah, like BJ said, I think, and for those of you that have watched some of our other broadcasts, most polar bear research was canceled this year. And that was true around the Arctic. There was a survey done on Wrangel Island in Russia, and that's one of the only things that got done, other than some work that we were able to get done, which took a lot of patience, a lot of plan A, B, C, D planning, and a lot of luck there. And I think, as we've been emphasizing, good partners who trusted us and who we trusted to work with. So we needed an opportunity. Right now, we don't have permits to capture, handle, or put tags on polar bears, but our partners do. Right now, we didn't have in hand the ear tags that we needed to test the tag holders, but our partners do. So it's bringing together these threads, and as BJ said, it all came together just perfectly in a way, but until it happened, we didn't know what was going to happen. That's how close it was. That's how uncertain the deployments actually were. One big plus, I think, is everyone wants a better tagging system, including our partners on the ground in Manitoba. Everyone wants something that's less invasive, but is also reliable. And so there is keen interest from the folks who are putting tags on bears day in and day out, work I used to do, but don't do so much anymore. And so that was super key and being there, and then just right place, right time, because PBI has the PBI house and the Mars Center in Churchill. I was there. I had a place to meet with partners. I had a place to lay out these tags, and I did. I didn't say, here's a tag I want you to put out. I said, you choose. Here's how these tags work. What do you think? And let them pick the tags they felt would be most likely to succeed. And going back to that earlier question, 3M nailed the things that you might think would be difficult: temperature, salt water, sort of the physical chemical sides of things, and just the actual attachment to the fur. Like, they tested that stuff in the lab with those machines that tug on things and measure force. So that stuff was completely dialed down by 3M engineers and team members there, but none of us knew how the polar bears would respond to these things. And that picture Emily had shown earlier of a bear not walking around a willow, but going through it, which is what they do. If you been lucky enough to go to Churchill and watch bears. They're not always gentle creatures and choosing the path of least resistance there at all. So we did get 5 tags out, 3 of the hook and loop attachment methods, and then 3, and John, you'll have to correct me if I call them tri-brush, but the Burr on Furr triangular shaped tags, or 2 of those that are currently out as well. 3 of the tags didn't last very long, and it wasn't a failure of 3M. It was bears going through willow and bears doing things unexpected. And also the nature of those tags is they float a little bit higher on the fur. They're not cinched down sort of to the base of the hairs and closer to the skin and the underfur, whereas the Burr tag and that last tag that John showed you, the sort of pentagonally shaped, both of those can really snug down tight. So we currently have 2 tags that are still out, still transmitting. One of them is actually on a bear whose ear tag failed. And so all of our study bears are double tagged. Since it's a new tagging method, no one wanted to only put those out. We want to make sure these animals are tracked for another project that the University of Alberta is working on, looking at movements and behavior of bears that have been released from D20, the holding facility in Churchill. Kind of where do they go after relocation? So it's set up a perfect opportunity for us to do that. And then being in Churchill too, and we'll touch on this with Marisa here shortly. And this again was pure chance that I happened to be there. The veterinarian from one of our zoo partners happened to be there, as did their director of research at this particular zoo. And they were keen to put a tag out soon when they're able to run a veterinary procedure on one of the bears they have in captivity. So a couple of big wins there, and something that could really change how we track bears and what we know about bears more broadly, including males, and I think especially subadults.
Actually, yeah, I have a
Geoff?
couple. Oh,
No, I was just going to say, and just commenting. I mean, you're right. The couple of them did fail, or they fell off. We don't see it as a failure, and we have so many of them because this is the scientific method, right? You prototype, you try things, you do the best at estimating and evaluating and designing for the conditions, but until you actually get out there, you don't know, and you want to have multiple options to discern which is going to work best, right? So it's learning, and it's going to be this will continue to evolve and refine. So,
yeah, we've already gotten feedback from our partners that have handled the tags and put them on bears, so we're working that into next gen already.
yeah, this is truly science and innovation in action. So it's a behind the scenes sneak peek. I do have a couple of questions before we continue on, and Geoff, you just kind of touched on this, but maybe you can elaborate. Amy wants to know if these tags will be able to go on males.
Absolutely. Technically, any bear, especially, I wouldn't say coys when they were in the springtime, but fall coys and older would be able to wear these tags because it's just attached to the hair. And they're a small enough size factor that for a 150-pound fall coy, it's no problem.
It's going to exponentially increase data.
Yeah.
Okay, another one before we go on from Jane. Jane asks, is there any risk of catching the devices on an ice hole when the polar bears hunt?
I would say the only risk is a premature tag release there, and possibly with a small piece of hair attached to it there. The tag will give way before any problems would arise. And we saw that pretty clearly with some of the early releases we've seen with the bears that were, I mean, I went out and looked for one of these tags in this area of heavy willow, and it was ridiculously thick brush. So when we got there, it's like, oh, yeah. I was thinking bears out on the ice, not bears in dense willow and cruising through it. So I wasn't terribly surprised when I saw where the bear had been released.
Great. Okay, I'm going to sneak one more in before we continue, two more in before we continue on. We have a lot of great questions popping in. So let's take, we're going to take a question from David. David is asking, is there a possibility of something like the RECO system that could be used or something injected under the skin that can transmit data?
So we did try implants years ago, back in the 90s. And back then, technology wasn't great. Tags were large and bulky. Polar bears are uniquely good at kind of identifying a foreign object, even if it's subcutaneous, walling it off and expelling it from their body. And so that was largely a failure. It was tried on large males. A big problem we have with anything sub-Q is skin is a great attenuator of radio frequency, or basically kills your antenna. So the antenna still needs to be out on the surface. And then you have that interesting problem of something poking out of the skin and, leaving something that could possibly cause a wound and cause some problems down the road. So that's something we've largely just given up on, as overly invasive and overly complicated.
Okay, and then a great question that will lead into our next section. Bob would like to know, are there any plans to test these tags on zoo bears? So you might want to just pass it right to Marisa. Marisa,
okay.
the
Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Kraus. I'm the program manager here at Polar Bears International. And one of the extreme pleasures of my job is getting to work very closely with zoos and aquariums. And we're excited to have some of our Arctic Ambassador Center partners who will do just that and participate in a testing phase that will help researchers evaluate this new technology under various conditions on very active bears, and work together with Polar Bears International and our other program partners to review and revise the attachment method. And that so nicely speaks to one of the pillars of the work of our Arctic Ambassador Center network. And you may hear me refer to these institutions as AACs. I apologize if I get heavy in the acronyms, but we work with a network of 50 institutions, zoos and aquariums across the US, Canada, and Europe. And all of these institutions are working collaboratively with other program partners, but also with Polar Bears International to participate in research, education, and action programs, all addressing the key challenges that polar bears face in a warming Arctic. So these institutions are helping to direct policy, they're setting research mandates, building even further collaborative partnerships, but also building public outreach and expanding our reach about polar bears and climate change. And I think, importantly too, especially during COVID, in which we find ourselves all physically distant, but connecting through virtual windows. I think we live in a world and live in areas that are increasingly disconnected from nature. And we see the world through all these digital windows, even now more during COVID. So I think our work with these committed partners with zoos and aquariums are important now more than ever. And we're so grateful for the entire Arctic Ambassador Center network for their participation, not only in meaningful conservation science, through some of these research programs that zoos and aquariums are participating in and identifying, key priority areas of focus, we're able to learn things about polar bears that might be impossible to study otherwise in the wild. And zoos and aquariums are really uniquely poised with access to the animals in their care and the ability to train desired behaviors that might help aid in participating in some of these projects. Our partners are committed to the animals in their care, and they understand that cooperative training, they understand the importance that has in balancing the welfare of the animals in their care, but also participating in meaningful science that helps us understand more about polar bears in the wild. But that being said, bears can, participate in non-invasive and passive and observational research as well. And in addition to participating in some of these conservation science programs, our Arctic Ambassador Centers are often helping to fund these important research projects as well. And specifically for the Burr on Fur project, we're so grateful for the generous support. I see some of you in the chat window here from Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, Dr. Holly Reed Conservation Fund, but also from our friends at the Kansas City Zoo. I've seen some of you in the chat. It's great to see you again. I've also seen a lot of folks from other Arctic Ambassador Centers and those interested in participating in the zoo-based testing phase, where we really have this incredible opportunity to validate new technology that can be used in the field. And so I might pass it back to Geoff. I don't know if he would like to comment further on some of the priorities that might take place once said research projects are approved by Polar Bear Research Council and internal review processes at each institution.
Sure. So we've been working with Marisa and team for over a year now to try to shortlist zoos with the highest potential. And for captive testing, what we really want are bears that are super active, in and out of the water, rolling around, doing things. So probably younger bears. Some of them may just be older and uniquely active. And then the other hurdle is going to be, there are two ways to get tags on bears. One would be through sedation, which zoos very rarely do unless they have veterinary reason to do that. And the other, like Marisa touched on, is through training. And so some of our zoo partners have pretty amazing, what they call back of the house facilities that allow them to train bears to do things like blood draws without sedation, allows them to potentially put a collar on a bear without sedation and to take it off again, allows them to do things like ultrasound on bears without sedation. So really kind of revolutionizing that whole side of animal care, but at the same time creating these cool opportunities for research. So some partners may be able to attach some of these tags without sedating the bear at all if they have both the facilities that give them safe access to that part of the bear, and if they have a staff that has that kind of training commitment and relationship with their bears. So it'll be, I think, really interesting in 2021 as we start down that path to see what shakes out. And we're keen, like Jon mentioned, and we touched on earlier, right now we have tags out. They fall off. With the first one, we got lucky. I was able to fly out at the mere cost of $1,500 to go try to find this tag, but at least we saw quite clearly what happened with that tag. The next two that dropped off on the ice. Why? What were they doing? Were they rubbing on their back? Did another bear pull it off? Like, what happened that caused that tag to come off? Those are the questions we can answer in a captive setting quite easily. We can see almost 24/7. Does the bear even respond to the tag being there? Is it aware of it? Does it quickly get used to it? Does it go over to, some rocks and start jackhammering on it? Things like that. That'll be super useful to Jon and team there in any modifications. So we're really looking forward to both continuing getting some tags out on wild bears so we can look at length of time. Can we get tags on bears and keep them on until molting? And then concurrently work with captive partners to look at those issues of refinement. What can we do to improve these tags and make them hold on better?
I have a great follow-up question to that, Geoff. Leslie did ask if the tags will fall off as the polar bears molt, which you just mentioned they would. So how often do polar bears molt?
Every summer. So it varies depending on the bear, it varies depending on region, and that's one of the reasons we brought in partners at University of Washington who are studying hair growth with, again, members of our captive research partner team there, because that's another side of that equation is when does this happen in the wild and how does it happen? How does it occur in a bear? Does all the hair come off at once? Is it front to back, up to down? And so Jenny Stern at University of Washington has been really dialing into that working with captive partners.
Awesome. Great question, Leslie. I have another good question here. I think this will probably be, well, we might have a few people that want to answer. Geoff, BJ, from Matt, how can we use the geolocation data from these tags to strengthen our argument for protecting polar bears?
Sure, I'll take a first swing, I guess. The same way we have with location data from collars, except now we'll have the ability to get much more data, both because we can put tags on males, subadults, younger bears. So we're really expanding the number of bears that can potentially wear tags. Something I hadn't touched on either is collars today are close to $6,000 a piece. These tags are $900. So dramatically cheaper as well, which will enable more tags to get out. They do last for a shorter period of time, but if they go out in summer or fall, we're still getting most of a year of movement for these bears. And from that movement data, like I touched on at the beginning, that's kind of how we drill down into almost all aspects of wildlife conservation, from population abundance estimates to looking at how changes in the case of polar bears, changes in sea ice habitat are affecting them.
Great. That's an awesome question. Thank you, Matt. We have another good question here from Val. So Val wants to know, will this technology be applied to other wildlife? And to your knowledge, are other wildlife organizations or those working in wildlife conservation aware that this technology is being developed? So I maybe pass that to BJ for starters.
Sure. So of course, the word has gotten out about these tags and the work that we're doing here, and we have been approached by some of our other zoo partners, as well as folks working in other wildlife fields that are super interested in this, because it's definitely not just for polar bears, and really not just for furry animals. It could be used on other things as well. So maybe you might have another career coming here, Dad, learning how to stick things to all sorts of animals all over the world.
And that's one thing that our long-term partners at Telonix, which is one of the primary companies that supply collars for polar bears, and they supply the little Argos ear tags we're using now, has said for years, is for them, if they can make something work on a polar bear, where polar bears live and how polar bears live, these rough tumble animals, it'll work anywhere. So it's kind of the best test for them as engineers. If they can dial it in the Arctic on a great big bear, then they can put it on things around the world.
Well, congratulations to you, Jon, for for working on a project or spearheading a project with such potential impact. And I do have a bit of a leading question here for you, Jon, which is this your favorite project of your career?
Oh, I would say yes. I've done a lot of really interesting and disparate kinds of work over my years. But this one is the most unusual and the most unique and probably the most fun. And I have to say, how cool is it that I get to work with my son across companies, across the country, and do something that really makes a difference in the world. I mean, this is really cool. So this probably is my favorite. Yeah.
Well, I have to say it's one of my favorite stories to have had the pleasure to tell in my time working with PBI. So lots of favorites flying around.
Yep.
I'm just checking to see, I think we may have gotten to all of the questions, but I just want to make sure I didn't miss any. This amazing questions, everyone. I think this has been one of the best discussions yet. So I think we do have, just double checking. Yeah, I think we have hit everyone's questions. So with that, we are going to wrap this event up. Thank you all so much. Well, first of all, thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate you all taking time to be here and to tell this story from so many different angles, because it truly is a effort, a team lift, a example of teamwork that has the potential to really impact this field that we all care so deeply about. And thank you so much to all of our attendees, whether or not this is your first event with us this year or you've been at the full series. We're so grateful to you for tuning in, for spending hours with us, and for mostly your true and sincere engagement in this topic. It is seeing all of your enthusiasm and your commitment that gives us as a team hope to keep doing this work, because we see that this really is a shared passion. So thank you all so much for being here. And we wish you all the very best in the end of 21. We hope from the bottom of our hearts that you have a peaceful end to your year, a good holiday season, that you stay healthy and well. And we look forward to seeing you in 2021 for a brand new fresh start, or for whatever it brings. We'll be in it together. And with that, I think we will close this series. So thank you. If all of our panelists can wave goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We'll be in touch.